Composer Gloves here, and this is the 15th video in the Kontakt from the Ground Up tutorial series. In our last video, we mapped some samples. In this video, we're going to clean up sort of what we did, and we're going to move to making those samples start to sound a little better. So, open up your whatever you're working on. I'm going to assume it's the flute. And so, I'm going to go to Files, Load Recent, Gloves Flute to get to mine. But you may have to go dig for it if you've been loading up a lot of stuff recently and you don't know where you put it. I don't know. But currently we have our samples loaded up. But we have some problems because one day we're going to add some vibrato samples to this if it turns out okay. We might just add them just to add them because I'm not particularly fond of the vibrato samples. But if we close our mapping editor and go to our group editor right here, we'll notice that we have all these extra groups, and that happened because we dragged each sample in with different settings and things. It's because you notice it didn't create one for each of them, so I'm not totally sure how this happened, but we're going to right click and we're going to purge empty groups. So this will get rid of all the groups without any samples in them anyways, and we'll notice that we are left with two groups. That's because these two groups contain notes. So we're going to open up our mapping editor below so that we can see them both. And in this one, so one other quick note, when you turn on edit all groups, any parameter changes you make in any of your stuff, any modulation sources, effects, blah, 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 all that stuff is affected to all your groups up here. So you don't necessarily want this on all the time. But we know that groups, this first two group I happen to know is these two notes. And so we're going to copy that, and then we're going to delete this group. And yes, it's going to like tell you, are you sure you want to do that? And we're going to be like, yes. And we're going to put those notes back. Okay. So we're just tidying up our group so it's all in one group, and we're going to rename it legato. Legato. I don't know. And so this will be our legato playing. And now we're going to get into our wave editor. So we have our wave editor here. And really quick on a brief note on the sample mapping, because I want to get our instrument sort of looking pretty solid before I start digging into stuff. You could have flute samples that are softer and recorded softer, and you could have those right here. Flute's kind of known for not having all that big of a dynamic range though, but you would be able to select all your samples by just dragging across, and then you could just shorten them all, and you could start building in your things. So there's that. We're going to lengthen them all back out. So if we open them down in our mapping editor, make sure your time mode is on well, it doesn't matter all the time, but sometimes this option is not always available. So we're going to make sure ours is on DFD, and we'll explain that, as we get going. But we have our samples, they're loaded up, and we've mapped them correctly, except for, I don't believe this is correct, because I recall playing a B flat. So we're going to move these all down one. Now they've been mapped correctly. They'd still sound correct because it will track them, since we have our tracking on, or we should have our tracking on. It will track them to the correct pitch, but according to our root note setting. But we actually played these notes, so I want them to be actually correct. Oh, I've got two B natural fives. That's what's going on here. That's weird. You know what? Doesn't sound all that bad. We're just going to leave it, because at that point, when you do something like that, you're going to have to go and search and dig and get the correct things out. And it actually wouldn't be this hard in this scenario, but we're just going to leave it be. So here's our waveform view, and you can change your waveform view via these guys. Now, we're going to do one thing before we change our waveform view, and that is we're going to add a modulation source. What is that? Well, we're going to target something with something that tells it how to behave. If you check out my massive series on envelopes, I think I did a pretty good job at describing what an envelope is, modulation sources. But essentially, we're going to send a signal that tells another signal how to behave, like I just said. And we're going to add one. So we're going to go to mod on our amplifier. We're going to tell our amplifier how to behave. And so we're going to add a modulator, and we're going to use what's called an envelope. And so now you see it adds our envelope here, and it actually has targets you can send it to. We're going to target the volume because we want all of our samples to start the same way. So when we move the start point to the middle, turn grid off. That's all I'm going to say about grid. Just make sure grid's off for this to work. So if we move our starting point up, we're going to get a click at the beginning. We're going to get a click at the beginning of our sound, and we don't want that. We want it to fade in. And so if we come down here on our modulation, you'll see that we've added a volume target envelope. And so we're going to change a few things. We're going to make our attack a bit smoother. Our hold will stay the same because it's a flute. So this envelope's a little different than your regular ADSR. It's got a hold option. So once you reach your attack, you can hold, then decay, and then you can sustain the decay. So it's just another kind of envelope. And we don't want our release to be that long. But we don't want it to be so short that it like clips either. And so now, no matter where we are in our envelope, we should have a smooth start. So let's go down to our bottom. And let's turn grid off. You're going to have to do this every single time. Turn grid off, and we're going to move our starting point up. That way, we don't need to worry about this beginning portion of our note. And you'll notice that we have a sample loop, and we've got our first loop already on. You can actually hit play to hear it play. But we're just going to drag that up. And you can do that by adjusting the start points here, which sometimes you may end up doing. And you're going to drag this over. Now, if we play our note now, we're still going to get clicks, though. And that's because there's no fade to repeat the loop. So we have this X fade option. You could turn that up, and you'll see it's represented here. And this is our volume curve, essentially. So now when we play our note, and this is where you could get kind of very particular about how certain things are. But we're going to go ahead and race through the rest of these. Oh, you'll also notice that on our loop, this is important, until end. So when you let go of your key, that's when it's going to start to really matter. So, and also you can tell that this isn't exactly the best for staccato. So you might want to record separate staccato notes. And ideally you've got like a musician, like my staccatos would sound absolutely horrible. So I'm not going to do that. So we're going to do the rest of these super fast. Turn grid off, adjust the loop length. We're not even going to listen to them. We're just going to make it happen like so. Maybe make that a bit longer. Turn grid off, adjust the loop length. Now on some samples you may hear clicking or popping. That you can fix by just dragging the other sample over that one slot. Make sure tracking's on, and usually you can get away with moving a note up a sample or two and it will still sound really good. After you start going like 3 or 4 notes down or up, though, you start having some more serious problems. Turn grid off. So, yep. This is where you also have to be kind of critical about what you're doing. And the reason I'm doing it like this is because if I notice anything that I'm like, ooh, that sounds kind of weird, I've got a weird volume, I could just adjust the length of my loop, and I could adjust the fade and all those types of things and adjust the envelope down at the bottom, and it will work out fine. So I hope you understood the envelope thing while I'm doing this. I might as well fill you up with some more information. There's this starting point causes the clip. That's what that affects. This X fade, so that volume affects that start point. This X fade affects the looping point. So that's all that's about. The first time I did this, it took me, because you don't want to read the manual or anything. Don't do that. So I was so lost on why my grid function was not working. And it took me forever because I didn't want to read the manual. No, don't do that. And it took me forever to figure out the envelope setting and how to add a modulation source, because I saw the envelope go down there, and I'd caved in and read the manual a little bit, but man, it you got to read a lot of it to really get going, you know? Now I'm like a manual maniac. I go there instead of the internet for most things. Unless it's not in the manual, which I have been shocked. I thought manuals were supposed to have like everything. No way, man. Manuals do not have everything. They have some stuff. So on this one right here, I'm going to make sure I do not include that portion because that looks a little funny. We're going off looks here. What kind of sound designer am I? And we're going to turn the X fade up. You'll notice that my curves are pretty varied. I try not to make them too big though, because if they're too big, it just won't work. And I'm avoiding that. Volume switches, because if we're going to loop it, that could sound funny. Generally, you want a big loop because then it sounds really natural. There's a lot of times something that's sort of imperceptible. If we had taken our time recording, a lot of this stuff, a lot of the creativity of the instrument happens during the recording phase, unless you have a really creative post idea. And yes, we're almost done. Only have one more note. And turn grid off again. Man, that grid thing, man, it kills me. I'm probably going to see if there's some sort of shortcut. Okay, so we have it done. Now if we play our flute. And let me adjust my MIDI controller so that I could play notes that high comfortably. We have a flute, and it doesn't sound that bad, right? Not that bad for the samples I provided. So... And you sort of may realize now some libraries you may enjoy or like may not have been recorded with all that much care. Now that beginning of the note thing, you may end up, you may want to vary. There's 100 ways you could deal with this problem. If you want your notes to sound more realistic, you can make modulations that affect each sample individually and start just a little bit differently using the loops. You're going to want to nail your group one though. And you might want to go listen to some flute players and just see kind of what happens when they play. And another thing that really sells something like this is the reverb. So if we go down here to group insert effects, effects. Oh, this is the wrong one. My bad. Go down here to insert effects, instrument effects. And go to effects, and now we have reverb. This is a different thing. We'll talk about that later. But we've got a reverb now, and I'm going to put down a note because my MIDI controller turns off, my keyboard does, every time I click something on the screen. How far up are these samples? There we go. It's because I adjusted the MIDI controller. Alright, so we're going to adjust our reverb now, because we could drench it in reverb later. We just want it to sound a little bit better. Where's the delay? You hear that clicking we've got going on. This would be something we'd have to go back and really nail. So that sounds pretty okay. Our instrument will sound substantially better with a little reverb. And you can fine tune these settings. Or you could go crazy and just ramp the reverb freaking all the way up. You have a really atmospheric instrument. Yeah, that's cool. See, this is totally something you could use in a track now. Like, totally viable option. We're going to turn our size down, because we just want that. We could add, what we're going to do is we're going to add a reverb option on our main script engine. or on our performance view when we add that. We're actually going to start digging in deeper now. That's pretty much, we've got a working instrument, something that's usable. Make sure you save it. Save edited instrument. And we're going to save it as the same one in the same location. Yes, we want to overwrite it. And now all of our changes have been saved. We've got one uniform group. And we're going to start diving into more of the details. We'll add our vibrato group later. That'll be interesting. I'm still not sure how that's going to turn out. But to just overview, we've got our legato group. We've mapped our samples. We've properly edited our samples and collected our samples. We have put our samples through the wave processing engine and created loops for them. We have set this up. We didn't really talk about that. We've done a little bit of post, like hardly any. We could arguably add an EQ still. And we have added a modulation source to cause the starting points of the notes to attack uniformly, which necessarily isn't true for realistic playing. So there are ways of varying it up. But for us, this will do for now. So if you have any questions about this, let me know. Like, comment, and subscribe. Like if you think this is great. Dislike it if you hate every second of it. And have a blessed day.